All right, looks like the time is 2:05. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Park Cannon. I serve Georgia's 58th House District. It includes Midtown, Downtown, and Southwest Atlanta. Luckily, this past year, the state Senate passed a resolution to create a study committee on homelessness in Georgia, and I commend the Senate on doing this. However, we know that the House needs to move on the issue as well. So I'm happy to be joined by representatives and senators today, who I will introduce by name. And if you can just kind of raise your hand or nod at that moment to make sure you are seen. Representative Abel Mabel Thomas, Representative Derek Jackson, Representative Sheila Jones, Representative Sam Park, Representative B. Wynn, Representative Mike Glanton, Representative Mike Gilliard, Representative Dewey McLean, Representative Marie Metz. And as far as senators, right now we have Senator Doc Rett and Senator Gail Davenport. So Georgia has made impressive strides in reducing homelessness in recent years. By some measures, we have reduced the number of homeless individuals by almost 40% since 2011. But we are by no means done. Millions of low and middle income Georgians are still threatened by the same influences that perennially force working people from their homes, low wages, lack of decent and affordable housing, and minor citations are some of these. And most alarming is the number of children who are victim to these trends. At some point in the span of one academic year, nearly 40,000 Georgia children, more than half of them in kindergarten, first and second grades, will experience homelessness. From Oregon to Louisiana, addressing homelessness has become a national priority. Governments around the country are stepping up to the plate and are making financial commitments to making it happen. Louisiana, whose situation is closest to ours, has done impressive work leveraging federal tax credits and Medicaid to establish permanent supportive housing for its homeless and disabled residents. Today, I call on the Georgia General Assembly to follow the Senate in studying homelessness in Georgia and to ask ourselves as a state if we are truly equipping our community departments with the resources that they need. I echo the Senate Study Committee's findings that the State Housing Trust Fund for the homeless has been effective and could be even more so with more appropriated funding. We must align our state's resources with our values to protect the least among us, our neighbors, our veterans, and our children. To speak to this issue from my community is Marshall Rancifer, who does a lot of work in homeless communities. I'll let him step to the mic at this time.
Good evening, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marshall Rancifer. I'm the founder of the Justice for All Coalition. I would like to say that it would be a help to the Atlanta homeless. There needs to be complete wraparound services similar to the Veterans Program at Fort McPherson that take care of dental services, mental health services, addiction services, child care services. Um, One of the other things that needs to be in place is policies that don't split families up here when they go into shelters. A single female with a child over 12, a child over 12 won't be admitted into a family shelter because of his age. One of the other things that needs to happen is they need people leaving jail or prison need to be needs to have IDs and birth certificates, so it don't take them 6 to 12 weeks to get acclimated back into society and be able to ask for services. One of the other things that needs to happen is there needs to be more money put in place immediately since the closing of the task force of the homeless. Last week, the city was overwhelmed with trying to shelter all the unsheltered people here in the city, and was just not enough services provided. And there needs to be sufficient money put in place, the same type of money that's put in place to build these new stadiums, to redo the civic center. Money, the same kind of investment needs to be put into the least of these of this city. Thank you.
At this time, we'll have our senator who served on the Homelessness Study Committee from the Senate speak, Senator Rhett.
Appreciate it. Thank you all. Glad to be here. I've worked with the Senate Homeless Committee this summer, and we tried to address not only the issue of homelessness, but mental illness and Veterans Affairs. And it was quite an eye-opening experience trying to work to create the least restrictive environment for homeless people to turn their lives around. But I also come here with a different perspective because before I came to the Senate, I personally worked with homeless people through the Fulton County government in the city of Atlanta. We worked at Jefferson Place, which is not open at the moment. But my job was to come up with a curriculum to empower people who are homeless or people who were coming out of prison. We would go in there once a week or every other week and recruit members out, expunge their records, and then I would help co-facilitate a drug rehab program for them. And then with the curriculum, what I would do is teach them personal finance. And once they passed my class in personal finance, we would open up a bank account at Capital Bank. And then I would teach them how to interview for a job, how to use the internet, how to fill out job application, find them employment, and then also not only find them employment, but also help them to get a place to stay afterwards. And I did the same thing also at the women's shelter at the City of Refuge, and I did the same thing with them. Also in conjunction with that, as he was talking about in terms of the family, we would also try to get funds to try and supplement their daycare, along with helping them find a job, a place to live, furniture. And also we looked at, with both men and women, when it came to personal relationship. But by doing these programs, it's not only helped with the recidivism rate of people coming from prison, but it empowered people to turn their lives around. City Refuge is still open, but Jefferson Place is not, and the funding we had through a Tri-J grant is no longer in place in terms of with Fulton County. But I can personally testify because I've worked with homeless people and I know their plight. And once given the proper setting, when you look at Maslow hierarchy of improvement, if you don't take care of the basic essentials such as food, safety, and comfort, then it's hard to move up the ladder of his hierarchy. And what we try to do is provide that firm foundation so that they can acquiesce and move forward. And we had a good turnout rate. So I'm just here to let you know that we really appreciate you all for being here and how important it is to try to create the least restrictive environment for all people to turn things around. And one of the interesting things there, a number of the people, they were homeless, but they may look like you and dress like you. But when we had that economic recession, a lot of people had to take a step back. So any one of us can be one paycheck short of being in that category. But I thank you so much for this opportunity, and I look forward to continue work with the homeless. Thank you so much.
So to conclude at this time, we just want to make it very clear that we are going to, in the House, continue to work on the issue of ending homelessness in Georgia. We thank the Senate for the work they have done on their study committee. It was a bipartisan measure. Thankfully, the chair of the Health and Human Services Committee, Renee Unterman, chaired the study committee and carried the legislation. And we are at this time looking for people in the House who will push that legislation forward. Thank you, and at this time, if there are any questions, we will take a few.
So is anyone here going to introduce any specific legislation to target any of the things that came out of the study committee last year?
As today is the fourth day of the legislative session, we are having those conversations at this time throughout different caucuses, and we're looking forward to putting forward legislation. If you think about the things that have been said here today, some of the identification laws make it very difficult for people to pay for identification when they come out of the penal system. Additionally, we're hopeful that the state of Georgia can think about a housing first model. This is a model that says you house people first and you deal with the other issues later. And lastly, of course, we are excited that the Senate was working on a study committee, and we do think that if it was a joint study committee, we would have been able to have more input from the community and other stakeholders. So we are looking forward to legislation.
Do you think the House will have a study committee as well? Or do you want the House to have a study committee as well?
As important as it would be to have the same study committee that the Senate just completed, we're really looking at the findings that they had. It included the Department of Justice, the Department of Corrections, the Department of Community Affairs. And so as DFACS and these other organizations have spoken out, we need to look at their findings and to move on those, not necessarily replicate this, what has been done already.
There's about 85 violations on the book that's specifically aimed at the homeless, and is there any way to get these off and maybe help police to not continually arrest homeless people for minor violations when they're trying to survive?
Thank you for speaking to some of these quality of life ordinances or offenses. Things that you're probably speaking about have to do with urinating in public, things that have to do with possibly sleeping somewhere outside or idling for a long time in one place. Perhaps even, using a water fountain in a dog park in order to bathe yourself. These are the offenses that officers are able to, in the state of Georgia, still deem to be putting you in the penal system. So ideally, we would be able to continue to work with the Department of Corrections, Pardons and Paroles, and the Department of Justice to repeal some of these quality of life ordinances. Thank you.
What I want to add in terms of the quality of life ordinance, are most of them locally driven? So, because I know as former city council, we used to have a lot of negative stuff. So is it statewide, or most of the stuff we talk about is just we have to deal with the local areas?
I'm not sure. I think it's local. I know that
I can speak to
the city
that.
council have met on it, they've studied it, they've had meetings, they've talked about it, but they've done very little. And, like jaywalking, spitting, just all kinds of stuff that other people could do, but if you're homeless, you get arrested for doing it.
I think we call it criminalization of the poor. And so what we do have an opportunity in the city of Atlanta specifically is the mayor of the city is coming to speak with us. And one of the things that was stated at the inauguration was that there was going to be a $1 billion fund specifically around housing. So what we'll have the opportunity to do is to let it be known that as a part of that, we would like some money specifically put aside for homelessness, but also we want to be sure that there are removal of some of those quality of life things that, because it seems like a lot of these things with the quality of life have been driven by their need to make sure they satisfy tourists. But at some point we need to satisfy tourists, but we also must have compassion for those who are down on their luck, and sick we bring them up in some housing, transitional and stable housing. And the other piece is I've been around a little bit, and I know about the Housing Trust Fund. And if you don't watch out with the Housing Trust Fund, it'll keep going down every year. So one thing that it won't necessarily need legislation, but I would like cooperation from anyone who's listening or my members of the committee that's on appropriation, is to increase the amount for the Housing Trust Fund. I'm not sure the number, but if we're not at a minimum of $20 million, then I think we are not really addressing the trust fund in a way that I think originally, when I was first came in, was supposed to be in place to do.
Yes, that's one of the recommendations from the Senate committee, and also just moving forward, looking at rental assistance, demonstration programs, and mixed income properties in high density communities. Also, we looked at statewide public and private partnerships to serve as a clearinghouse with best practices. But the main thing is and we're not just looking locally, but we're looking statewide, and we're looking at providing funding, just like the representative said, to address it, because with the economy, sometimes it goes up, sometimes it goes down, and then it definitely has an effect on it. But when it comes to law enforcement, one of the challenges for them is a lot of times when it comes to finding support for people with mental health issues, that is falling a lot of times on the penal system to get them the support they need. And what we're trying to do with the funding is to try and set up a mechanism to help them to get the services they need, which usually leads to what you were talking about, behavior publicly that might not be befitting in the metro area. Mhm.
If there are no more questions, then we'll be concluded with the press conference on ending homelessness in Georgia at this time. Thank you.